Welcome to Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine.
Welcome to Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. I'm Evan Mack, and in today's episode, we're looking at how bankruptcy law has evolved and where it is heading, from major legislative shifts to the impact of digital finance and COVID-19. This is Emerging Trends in Bankruptcy Filings, What You Need to Know. Barry Levine, welcome. Right off the bat, you got my father's name, so I know you're a swell guy. I know this is
Hey,
greatness that's about to happen
the
right now.
Barrys, as long as they spell it with a Y at the end and not an IE,
That's how they do it, man. That's how they do it.
It's cool.
That's the only way to spell it.
Well, no, my female attorney namesake spells it IE, and she does divorce work. I get calls from her clients all the time. They say, "You did my divorce in 1978," and I say, "This voice, I sound like your attorney?" But
Well, welcome. Right off the bat, Barry, can you kind of provide an overview of the key changes in bankruptcy law over the past
something, the interesting thing about bankruptcy law is how, to a certain extent, it's very static.
Right.
The only thing that really changes, at least from debtors counsel's point of view, is exemptions keep going up. Like for instance, in Massachusetts, up until actually last August, I of course found out in January, who tells me, the homestead in Massachusetts went up to $1 million. Which makes a big difference because if a person files bankruptcy, you can protect up to $1 million worth of equity. But as to other issues from a debtor's point of view, there really aren't that many. Sorry to say, it's sort of run of the mill. I mean, each case is different, but an assetless case is an assetless case, and if you go into it correctly, it's an assetless case. Certain things like, from a trustee's point of view, a Chapter 7 trustee, if a parent, that's something that I've encountered in a few cases, where parents pay their children's tuition for college when they're over 18. A trustee could recover that from the college as a preference. Doesn't affect the debtor at all, and it results in something for the creditors. But, most of the things from a debtor's point of view, it's really, I took a lot of French, but I remember none of it. But there's some French phrase that the more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, in fact, I've had some people recently who've come in and, they filed a bankruptcy before, and I'll say, "So when did you file a bankruptcy?" "Oh, 2011. In Massachusetts, they'll say yes, and sure enough, I check it out, and the trustee of their case in 2011 is still a trustee today. So it really doesn't change. The technology changes. We used to do 341 meetings by schlepping into Boston or out to Worcester or down to, don't even want to know places we used to schlep to. But now, COVID hit, it took place by phone. And now, since it's almost since January, it's all been by Zoom. So, basically, this is a 341 meeting with my client sitting behind me.
Wow.
But as to things changing, it's status quo.
Yeah. So what about the legislative changes such as bankruptcy abuse prevention, consumer protection act? What about
Most
that?
run-of-the-mill people, what that maybe does things for, like class actions,
Okay.
they did this, they looked at you cockeyed, so, the bank loan officers didn't jump up and salute you when you walked into the bank, "Oh, that's a violation," but most of it doesn't necessarily affect a consumer debt. It's the same thing. Even now there's some website. I shouldn't give them free advertising, but of course I can't remember the name. That you can. There are class action suits that you can sign up without providing any evidence of you purchasing the product or the service that the class action is paying people for. So you just have to give your name, and presumably you get a check.
Well, can you explain how the rise of digital financial products and technology has influenced
Well,
bankruptcy practices?
the digital products, it's really it's another question when you go to a 341 meeting that a chapter 7 trustee will ask. But like any asset, a digital product, aside from you saying you forgot the code to get into the account, has no more protection than anything else. I mean, you have certain exemptions that you're entitled to. In Massachusetts, like I said, if you have a house, you generally take the state exemptions because you have the homestead exemption. But if you don't, you can take the federal exemptions, and you have wild card. I think it's 35,000 that you could apply to any asset. But again, if you have an asset that is above the exemptions, you have to do some bankruptcy planning, unless you want to write a check to the Chapter 7 trustee. They, aside from making $65 in an assetless case, they make more money if they find assets. So you'll find that they'll ask about Bitcoin. They'll ask about various other versions of Bitcoin. The easiest answer is most people who file bankruptcy don't. There are a lot of these, so many things you discover when you do this shit. There are a lot of people who, if you sign up for some online banking service or something like that, they'll give you not necessarily a Bitcoin, but a quarter of a Bitcoin or one share of stock. But in the scheme of things, it's bupkis. You list it in a bankruptcy, but it would be exempt. It's when, I think I've mentioned this here before. And, over the months, nothing's really changed. I have a debtor who actually has $200 million worth of Bitcoin, and he's in a Chapter 7. He only has $5 million worth of debt. And the only problem is he can't access the Bitcoin because the, what do they call, wallets, is held by somebody else, and he
Wow.
won't give it up.
Wow.
It'll be a movie one day.
It sounds like a movie. What about adjustments in the law? What specific adjustments do you think have positively impacted small businesses?
Well, from small businesses, it's been a very big shakeout right now because, what's coming home to roost is that, the government, amongst other things, was very kind to businesses during COVID, and they gave a lot of businesses SBA loans. Uh, Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't have. But a lot of these businesses were able to survive COVID. But once reality hit, the whole world has changed from a business perspective. And they're finding they're going out of business. And what's happening is that the principal is now filing a bankruptcy to get rid of the SBA liability. But, from a business point of view, you really have to, small businesses, you always have to pay attention to your cash flow. Are you paying your bills as you're going? I mean, are you on COD with everybody? Are you using the money you're withholding from your employees to pay your expenses? That's signs of a troubled business. Most things haven't changed. Uh, it's I really shouldn't say it, but it's somewhat boring after 40, almost 45 years.
But 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 in your practice though, Barry, have you noticed any shifts in consumer attitudes towards bankruptcy as a result of all these changes that we're
Well,
talking
the thing
about? Or
is, most consumers still fear the unknown. I mean, the one thing between myself and my assistant Kathy, who is not here today, uh, we that's I don't pride myself in anything, but we sort of we feel good that when clients leave here, they feel much better about their situation, because the bottom line is, most of these people, granted, some of them have health problems too, but it's not your health; it's just credit cards, it's money. Bank of America, American Express, they can take the hit. They're not going to blink an eyelash. In fact, they'll probably sell the account to somebody after you discharge it in bankruptcy, and you'll hear from somebody else. But it really, what I've been finding more and more is that uh, in fact, it's been since January of 2024. It's been busier than it's ever been.
Wow.
More people are filing bankruptcy, and it's running the gamut from, people in their early 20s to people who are, if you can believe it, older than I am, in their late 80s filing a bankruptcy. And, I was trying to have a conversation with somebody who is older than I am, telling her that if she did nothing, the likelihood of her creditors ever collecting any money from her is extremely remote. Is she going to live that long? But, you really can't say things like that to people.
You know you
So she's going to be filing a bankruptcy because, people file bankruptcy. It gives them the peace of mind. That's what a lot of people are seeking. They unfortunately, too many people, they Google it themselves and they speak
Yep.
to their friends and they do this, and it's all mishigas. The reality of, you know what mishigas is?
I'm very familiar. Listen, I like the way you talk right now, so
Oh,
I'm
all
gonna keep
right,
it.
all right. Because a few of the
I'm
hosts
with you. I'm
I've
with
had,
you.
I've had to explain. So when I say Drek, you'll know what I'm talking about.
I'm very excited. Go, go, go. When
So,
you said schlep, I was
so
like, yeah.
well, I'm from Brooklyn, if you can't tell.
Okay.
So, most of them, it's a shame, but it's been so busy. The economy is so bad. And I think creditors are getting more aggressive again because, listen,
Mhm.
the one thing that used to drive the bankruptcy business was aggressive creditors. When I hear from a creditor and, they'll call about somebody who retained me 3 years ago and who I haven't heard from again, I tell the creditor, I don't know, get in touch with them. I can't say that I retain them anymore. And presumably that'll prompt them to do something because the creditors are a good source of business, because the typical consumer fears what they can do. And this, the only things that they can do, there's a wage garnishment, which you know about in advance.
Right.
There's a foreclosure on your house, which you know about in advance. And then if you have a business, there may be a secured party seizure of your assets, which you know about in advance. Nothing, at least in America today, happens overnight. I've had people that boggles my mind when they come in here and they say, like the foreclosure practice hasn't changed. In fact, it takes longer to foreclose. In Massachusetts, it can take up to a year and a half. And when somebody comes in here, they'll call and say, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I have a foreclosure scheduled for 11 o'clock. It's like, you just found out about this. It doesn't happen like that.
Mm.
And hopefully they do something about their house. But it's still, everything happens with notice. So, there's, I find myself saying often to creditors, if we, don't file your bankruptcy today, how is your life going to be different if we wait another 30 days for whatever? I
Mhm.
mean, nothing's going on. Somebody files a lawsuit against you. Well, so what? It's sitting in the court. Doesn't mean anything.
But Barry, how did COVID-19 affect bankruptcy law and how you went about things?
COVID, it didn't really affect anything to the extent that they passed anything, saying because of COVID, at least to my knowledge, it changed some of the practices. Like I said, we used to go into Boston and these places for the 341 meetings. We started conducting the 341 meetings by phone. Hearings started to take place remotely. And I'll say that the COVID resulted in a lot of lending by the feds to
Mhm.
a lot of people, and also you had people who were, able to get, what were the gig workers who were getting unemployment, right? And then once it stopped, the sort of reality hit in, and bankruptcy started to pick up again.
But are there any particular trends or anything emerging as far as bankruptcy issues that you believe play a significant role in shaping the future? You've been doing this for a while, but do you see anything coming down the line?
I really don't think so. It all comes down to, when you file a bankruptcy, you're presented with certain exemptions, and what does the client have? I mean, I give you a good example. I was consulted by a couple, uh, basically bankruptcy candidates, But as we started chatting, she happened to mention, which of course is the worst you can do, she happened to mention that she owned a house in Canada that her mother lived in. And there's no way to protect, unless she lived there, a Massachusetts homestead doesn't apply. So, from a bankruptcy point of view, there was no way she could file a bankruptcy without either knowing the value of the house. From my perspective, what are we dealing with up there? Or, for instance, she was telling me, because she couldn't understand that the house is in Canada. She was telling me that her mother has a life estate, and in Canada, a life estate is like having ownership. Whereas in the United States, a life estate is, okay, I have a life estate and there's an owner.
Right.
And I said, if you can get a lawyer up in Canada to give me an opinion on that, I'll file your bankruptcy. But, to me, it's a question of, can you exempt it? I mean, if it's worth $200,000 and you can't exempt it, you want to write a check to the trustee. I mean,
thank you so much for the time and information, sir. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I enjoy this, and as I say, everybody, like, I'm an old Jew. I tell people, maybe you don't know this one, sei gesund, which means.
Oh, I've heard it, like, because Michigan, I said, you're speaking Yiddish to me, and I was like, I said I haven't heard that one in a little bit, but that one you got me on.
Sei gesund. Be healthy. Stay well.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for tuning in to Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. To connect with Barry, head to levineslaw.com. Like, subscribe, leave a review if you found this information helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey through bankruptcy. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.